Mark Spector watched his reflection blur in the van's smeared window. Same face, three different tensions in it. Jaw set, scanning exits, Mark. Brows pinched, eyes too soft, Stephen. That crooked almost smile like the world was a joke he wouldn't share, Jake. We don't have to do this, Stephen murmured. Hospitals. Last time wasn't exactly a vacation. We tried everything else, Mark muttered. The orderly opposite didn't look up. We keep waking up in other people's blood. We need help. A third presence coiled in the dark above his thoughts, older than any of them. Not quite a voice, more like stone grinding on stone. They still walk the night, it said. They still need judgment. The van braked. The presence broke apart into crackling static. For a heartbeat he could feel it, white armor cinching around him. The heat of chains dragged over asphalt. Then it was gone, leaving bleach and vinyl and the ache in his temples. Outside, the building waited. Low, concrete glass. No barred towers, no gargoyles, just tinted windows and a sign that said New Hope Psychiatric. A place pretending not to be a cage. Mark Spector, the orderly called. He stepped down, hospital-issue white scrubs whispering against his legs. They'd taken everything at intake. Phone, keys, the tiny stone bird he kept in his pocket. Good, Jake said dryly. Would have been ashamed to stab anyone with a god. Inside was too warm, too clean. Beige couches, abstract art. A guard by the metal detector, hands folded, eyes busy. The nurse who met him was young, headscarf tucked neatly around her face, eyes tired but kind. RAHMAN, AISHA. Mr. Spector, she said, I'll walk you to Dr. Trask. Do you know why you're here? He'd practiced this on the ride. I have dissociative identity disorder, he said. The words tasted like chalk. I lose time. People get hurt. I want to stop that. Her expression didn't change at the word want. And the other beliefs, the God, the spirit. He forced a shrug. That's what we're here to sort out, right? Honesty helps, she said. Dr. Trask specializes in trauma. She's very good. The corridor smelled of fresh paint and something metallic under it. Mark passed open doors. A tall blond man in scrubs too tight across his shoulders, staring at his hands like they'd once held something heavier. Another patient by a window, left sleeve pinned where an arm should be, whispering, Steve, like a prayer. Cold brushed the back of Mark's neck. War ghosts, the old presence said faintly. Old wounds. This place hums with them. They stopped at a frosted glass door. STRASK MD. She's expecting you, Aisha said. I'll come get you when you're done. Dr. Sandra Trask's office looked exactly like it should. Books, a plant, a salt lamp glowing weak amber, diplomas. No skulls, no blood, no obvious sigils. Trask herself was in her 40s, hair in a neat bob, glasses magnifying pale gray eyes. She stood to shake his hand. Mark, I'm glad you made it. Her grip was warm, human. He didn't trust it. He sat. The couch gave just enough to imply comfort without actually offering it. Your file is extensive, she said, paging through a chart. You describe being chosen by an Egyptian moon deity, acting as his, night, and more recently, housing a fiery spirit that rides a motorcycle and punishes the guilty. He went very still. Didn't think you led with the crazy. Her smile was small. I prefer to lead with your story. If we avoid it, it grows teeth. She met his eyes. I'm going to say this now so you can hear it as often as you need. There are no gods here, Mark. Only people. You are not a monster. You are a man who's been hurt. Stephen stirred, wanting to believe her. Jake rolled his eyes. Something scratched at the edge of his hearing, like wire being pulled across tile. In your notes, Trask went on, the god's name is Khonshu, yes, and the spirit the writer. Did I write those, he asked, or did you? One of her eyebrows lifted, impressed. You dictated them to a previous doctor. Memory gaps are common with dissociation. Her pen hovered. Are you hearing the voice now? The scratching grew louder. He glanced at the glass of her bookcase. For an instant, the reflection was wrong. Her cheeks were sunken, teeth too many in a stretched grin. Hair wild, crackling like something under static. Her fingers had grown into thin black strands that unspooled across the floor like cables. Green pinprick eyes met his in the glass. He blinked hard. The image snapped back. Ordinary woman, neat desk, pen tapping. Mark, she said gently, what did you see? His heart thudded. Don't say it, Jake warned. Let her think you're boring. Headache, Mark lied. Travel makes me. He let the sentence trail. Trask wrote something down. Visual phenomena, she murmured. We'll monitor that. For today, I just want you to notice your thoughts. When you hear the voices, ask what fear they're protecting you from. Can you do that? The ancient presence snarled, distant and furious. She wraps her lies in silk, it said. This is not safety. He kept his face blank. I'll try. Good, she stood. Nurse Raman will show you to the common room. It helps to meet others, to see you're not alone. The hall outside seemed a touch longer than before. The same landscape painting appeared, identical, 3 times in a row. The clock above the nurse's station read 3:33. When he looked again a few steps later, it still did. Jet lag, Aisha said when he glanced up, happens. He hadn't mentioned the clock. The common room was a box of beige. TV bolted high, plastic tables, barred windows looking out onto a lawn too green to be natural. Group time, Aisha said. You can just watch first day. A tall blonde in blue scrubs sat at a table, frowning at a checker piece like it should answer him. Across from him, the one-armed man slouched with practiced carelessness, dark hair falling into eyes that had seen more than his file probably said. New guy, the one-armed man said, Brooklyn in his vowels. You look like you still know what year it is. Give it time. James, Aisha said, warning in her voice. Name's Bucky, he added anyway. He tipped his chin. They say I made up a war, couple of them actually. Donald, the blonde muttered. Donald Blake, I used to, never mind. In the far corner, a thin young man with hair sticking straight up hugged his knees, eyes darting as if following invisible birds. On the couch, a woman with tangled dark hair and hollow cheeks stared at her hands. Her belly pushed tight against scarlet scrubs, 4 months at least. She whispered in a language Mark had heard on foreign streets, words falling out like prayer and apology jumbled together. The air felt heavy, like a storm trapped inside walls. Mark sat where Aisha pointed. Bucky's gaze weighed him, a soldier measuring another without meaning to. You buy any of this? Bucky asked under his breath, nodding toward the TV, the posters about coping skills. Mark considered the question, and the security cameras, and the faint scratching he could still almost hear. I'm here, he said. That's a start. Across the room, the pregnant woman's fingers twitched. For a heartbeat, the fluorescent lights dimmed and reddened, casting the walls in a color that didn't exist on hospital palettes. Then everything snapped back. No one reacted. Except the ancient thing in his skull. This is not a hospital, it whispered, farther away now as if something thick muffled it. This is a feeding pit. Mark stared at the reflection in the blank TV. For a moment, behind his shoulder, a thin woman with wild hair and wire-dripping hands smiled at him with Trask's eyes. He didn't flinch this time. All right, he breathed, so low only his own fractured mind could hear. If something's eating us, it picked the wrong stomach. Stephen swallowed, Jake grinned. Somewhere very far above them, under a sky they could not see, a crescent gaze turned toward the building and refused to look away. The first night was a mosaic of half-dreams. Mark woke with the taste of sand in his mouth and the echo of chains ringing in his skull. For a second, he thought he felt the dull weight of armor on his chest, the phantom burn of fire spiraling up his spine. Then the fluorescent hum pressed in. Thin mattress, white blanket, door with a little square of wired glass. Hospital, he muttered. We checked ourselves in, remember. I remember pyramids, Jake said. I remember bullets. This feels like a cheap set. We agreed to give it a chance, Stephen insisted. Actual therapy meds, maybe no more waking up next to corpses. Sounds nice, honestly. Something ancient shifted in the dark behind them. You are needed, it rasped, like stone dragged over stone. The night has no shield. The guilty have no reckoning. The voice fuzzed, like a radio slipping out of range. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes until sparks danced. When he lowered them, the room's wall clock read 7:14. Its second hand didn't move. He watched 10 breaths, 15, still 7:14. He blinked hard. The second hand jumped, whirring ahead in a blur to 7:16. Okay, he whispered. That's not how clocks work. Aisha collected him after breakfast. She had shadows under her eyes like she'd been up all night, but still tried for a smile. Rough first night. Define rough, Mark said. Nightmares, she asked. Voices. He thought of telling her about frozen seconds and grinding gods. Instead, he shrugged. I snore. She huffed a quiet laugh and led him down the corridor. The same framed landscape of a lake appeared on 3 walls in a row. Budget decorators, he said. What? Nothing. The brass plate on the door read STRASK. MD. The air inside her office was cooler, faintly lemongrass. Morning, Mark, Dr. Trask said. Same bob, same pale eyes behind round glasses. Her posture was loose but precise, like a dancer pretending not to care. He sat, the couch exhaled politely. Tell me about the first time you met this god, she said, no preamble today. Khonshu. He stared at a point over her shoulder. Egypt, he said. Desert, I'd screwed up a job, people died. I was shot, crawled into a tomb to die with them. I bled out under a statue. Then I woke up with a bird skeleton yelling in my head. Trask nodded slowly. So you were dishonorably discharged, became a mercenary, and when a mission went wrong, you imagined a god rescuing you from the consequences. It didn't feel imagined. Guilt rarely does, she said softly. You'd been hurt your whole life. Your mother, your father's absence, the army using you. Of course your mind built something powerful to say, your pain has meaning. You're special. You don't have to be just a broken man who failed his unit. Her words were scalpels. They cut in the right places. Then the rider, she went on. A second spirit that punishes the guilty. Why two? Mark swallowed. The memory rose anyway. Asphalt under his knees, the smell of burning gasoline, laughter that wasn't his pouring out of his own mouth as chains ignited. I don't know, he lied. Or, she said, one part of you wanted discipline, rules, khonshu. Another wanted pure rage, this rider. Both let you hurt people and call it justice. She turned her chair a fraction. The wall clock over her door read 9:03. The second hand ticked exactly 5 times, then jumped back, repeating the same 5-second arc like a GIF on a loop. Stephen surged up, startled. Mark, he said aloud before he could catch himself. Trask's pen paused. Who am I speaking with? He felt the shift in his face, the way the muscles held differently when Stephen drove. Stephen, he said, accent thinner here like he'd been sanded down. Sorry, I needed a look at the surroundings. Trask's gaze warmed by a degree. Hello, Stephen. You're the one who reads hieroglyphics, yes, the scholar. She said it like she approved of that one, like the others were less. Stephen's eyes snagged on the diplomas behind her. The lettering crawled a little when he tried to focus. Names resolving, smearing, resolving again with tiny differences. Columbia became Columba, became something in a language he didn't know. He blinked, they stilled. Things feel off, don't they? Trask said quietly. Like you can't quite trust what you see. His throat went dry. Is that part of the disorder? It can be, she said. Your brain is trying to protect you from truths you don't want, so it distorts. You make gods, you make heroes. You'd rather be a savior in a fantasy than a victim in reality. The scratch of her pen underlined each sentence, a steady, patient sawing at his foundations. Something in him retreated. The room tunneled, her voice echoing. For a moment he wasn't on the couch at all. He was standing in blackness. Chains webbed the dark, stretching into forever. 2 figures hung bound among them, one tall and bird-skulled, wrapped in gravecloths that smoked where iron touched, the other a man-shaped blaze, all bone and fire, its head a roaring skull, its chains dimmed to sullen embers. Mark, the bird-skulled one's jaw didn't move, but the name reverberated through his chest. They drugged the sky. They curtained the moon. Wake up. Another awareness nudged his. Not Khonshu, not the rider. Younger, skittish, like someone peeking through his eyes from behind a door. Who's there? Mark said, and he wasn't sure if he said it aloud or in this void. A boy's voice whispered, You're loud, full of awe and terror both. For an instant he saw flickers, a thin kid in scrubs, hair sticking up, eyes too bright. Then something else looked back. Green pinprick eyes, wide and delighted, floated in the dark beyond the chains. Long fingers of shadow stretched toward him like wires. He jerked. Mark, Trask's voice snapped the world back into an office. Her hand was on his wrist, fingers cool and firm. Stay with me. Count 5 things you can see. His breath came ragged. He counted. The plant, the lamp, the too-still clock, her glasses, his own hands shaking in his lap. There, she soothed. Dissociation is frightening, but it can't hurt you. None of it is real, Mark. Not the gods, not the fire. Out in the hall, a shout went up. A crash. Aisha's voice startled. Wanda. Trask's eyes flicked to the door, then back to him. We're almost done. Stay here. She stepped out. Through the half-open door, Mark caught a stuttering snapshot. The common room, lights flickering red for half a heartbeat. Wanda on her feet, one hand outstretched. a plastic cup hanging in the air between her and a nurse. Water had burst from it, frozen mid-splash in a halo around her fingers. Then the lights blinked. Gravity remembered its job. The cup hit the floor. So did Wanda, clutching her belly, gasping. Staff swarmed. By the time Aisha ushered Mark past 10 minutes later, he heard only the tidy version. Hypotension, another nurse said. She got dizzy, knocked the cup over. I told admin these scrubs are too loose, they trip. On the TV, static writhed in weird hexagonal patterns before settling back into a talk show. No one seemed to notice. That night the common room felt smaller. Bucky sat by the window, stump of his left arm resting on the table, fingers of his right hand tapping an absent rhythm that sounded like gunfire if you listened too long. Mark sat opposite him, silence stretched. You ever serve? Bucky asked finally, eyes on the dark glass. Yeah. Thought so, he scratched at the edge of his bandage. They say I made it all up, the war, the long parts after, guessing you got a similar speech. More or less, Mark said. He watched Miguel make his rounds, key ring chiming softly at his hip. The orderly's gaze skated over them, tired but not unkind, as if he'd trained himself not to really see anyone. Guy in my head, Bucky went on, too casual, he keeps telling me this place isn't right, that I'm older than I look, that I've done things. Voices like that can be persuasive, Mark said. Bucky's eyes finally cut to his, sharp and blue. Yours say anything about clocks freezing. Mark hesitated. Then he decided he was tired of lying to people who looked this haunted. He says this isn't a hospital, Mark murmured. Says something feeding on us, called it a feeding pit. Bucky was very still. Feeding on what? Fear, guilt, nightmares. He managed a dry smile. We're a buffet. Bucky huffed once, not quite amusement. Hell of a metaphor. It wasn't a metaphor, Mark said. They sat with that. Even if he's just a voice, Mark added quietly, he's not wrong about one thing. This place doesn't behave like reality. The halls loop. Time sticks. People do things they shouldn't be able to. He nodded toward where Wanda had been wheeled away. So, Bucky asked, what do we do, Doc? Don't call me that, Mark said on reflex. Then we don't make noise, not yet. We watch, test where the walls are soft. Clocks, doors, routines. Maybe that kid, David, he brushed up against me earlier, felt like contact. You want to organize the loonies, Bucky said. Stage a breakout from reality. You got a better plan. Bucky looked back at the glass. For a moment, their reflections weren't quite theirs. Two men in different uniforms, both armed, both younger and older at once. Yeah, Bucky said at last. Don't do it alone. He stuck out his right hand. Mark took it. His grip was firm, soldier's grip. Quiet resistance, Bucky said. Recon first. Then we see what kind of monster we're actually up against. Outside, beyond the window's darkness, clouds slid over a moon neither of them could see. Somewhere within that hidden sky, an eclipsed god strained against his chains and smiled with what passed for hope. In the common room, the TV murmured about weather and elections as if any of it mattered inside these walls. Mark sat across from Bucky at the scarred table. Between them, a deck of bent cards lay untouched. Donald Blake stared at the muted screen from an armchair too small for him, shoulders hunched to make himself fit. Hospital scrubs strained at his chest and biceps. His beard was uneven, like he'd shaved by feel and gotten bored halfway through. You see it too, Donald said suddenly without looking at them. Mark glanced at Bucky. See what? The storm, Donald murmured. Behind their eyes, everyone walking around like the sky isn't about to split. His fingers twitched on the armrest as if they expected a weight that wasn't there. A hammer. She tells me the accident took them, my family, that I made up everything after. The realms, the battles, gods. Easier to be a failed doctor than a failed son, right? Bucky's jaw flexed. She, he echoed, Dr. Trask. Donald finally turned toward them. His eyes were too old for his paperwork age, full of a grief Mark recognized. You too. You sit like soldiers, like people who know what it's like to lose the whole world and keep waking up anyway. He hesitated. Tell me I'm not the only fool who dreamed up a war bigger than the ones on TV. Mark let out a breath. What if it isn't a dream, he said quietly. What if something wants us to think it is? A flicker crossed Donald's face. Hope sharp enough to hurt. Outside the narrow window, a bank of clouds thickened over the mid-morning sun. The fluorescent lights hummed harder. We need to test it, Mark said. Not in our heads, in the walls. Bucky, you said your guy in there keeps cataloging exits. Yeah, Bucky answered slowly. Stairwells, fire doors, guard patterns. He tapped his temple with his right hand. One of us is very organized. Donald leaned forward. The chair creaked in protest. You're planning escape. Planning a walk, Mark said. From here to the south exit, without staff leading. No detours. If we get there and it's normal, maybe Trask is right. If not, then this place is a maze, Donald finished. A faint roll of thunder answered him, distant and improbable on a clear forecast. Mark saw the hairs rise along Bucky's arm. They chose the lull after lunch when meds dulled most of the ward. Nurse Aisha was busy gently coaxing Wanda to sip water, her voice low and warm. Miguel checked a supply cart, key ring chiming at his hip. Gentlemen, Miguel said as they shuffled toward the corridor, group walk. Stick to the yellow line, yeah. Just stretching, Mark said. He flashed a bland smile he'd used on suspicious guards his whole life. Miguel shrugged, already turning away. They slipped past the nurse's station, following a strip of faded yellow tape along the floor. The south exit was, according to every map straight ahead, 3 turns down. Mark counted his steps under his breath. 32. Turn left at the watercolor of a sailboat. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and something too sweet. 70. Right at the vending machine humming against the wall. 120. Fire door with a red push to alarm bar. A small sign, authorized staff only. That's it, Bucky murmured. I've seen Miguel smoke out there. Mark reached for the bar. He blinked, and his fingers touched empty air. They were standing at the threshold of the common room again. Same scuffed linoleum, same buzzing TV. Donald's chair. Bucky's cards on the table, still in a messy half-shuffle. Donald swore under his breath. No, he said. We walked, I felt it, my legs. Mark's heart hammered. Again, he said. They retraced their path. Same hallway. Same watercolor, but now the sailboat's sails were tattered, sky darker. Same vending machine, logo colors slightly wrong. A different song was playing faintly from nowhere. At the fire door, Mark didn't hesitate. He shoved the bar. The world skipped like a scratched disc. He was back in the common room doorway. This time, Wanda sat where Donald's chair had been, blankly staring at the off TV. Donald stood near the window instead, knuckles white on the sill. Bucky's stump was wrapped in blue gauze, not white. You're seeing it, Donald said hoarsely. Yeah, Bucky breathed. Yeah, we are. A prickle ran down Mark's spine. Stephen whispered, this is wrong, this is all wrong, while Jake snarled, trap, we're rats. Find the hand holding the maze. Enjoying your stroll, Dr. Trask's voice floated from behind them. She stood by the nurse's station, lab coat crisp over green scrubs, a file folder hugged to her chest. Her glasses caught the fluorescent glare, hiding her eyes. Physical activity is good, she went on mildly, approaching. But unstructured wandering isn't safe. We've talked about impulse control, Mark. He opened his mouth, then froze. For a heartbeat, her face rippled. Skin thin to parchment, stretched over something smiling too wide. Her fingers lengthened in his peripheral vision, nails trailing down like ink-black wires to the floor. The lights flickered. In the stuttered dark, another shape loomed behind her. A woman whose eyes were pits of viridian, whose teeth were too many, whose scrubs hung in burnt ribbons. Nightmare, a voice roared in Mark's skull. Khonshu, clear and furious. You crawl from the old dark and dare chain my night. Then his voice cut off, strangled. The overhead bulbs hummed back to steady life. Dr. Trask was just Dr. Trask again, lips pressed in a disapproving line. You look pale, she said. All of you. Bucky, Donald, why don't you sit? Mark, come with me. I'm concerned about these dissociative episodes. A weight pressed against his thoughts like a hand pushing his head underwater. You got turned around, she said gently. You tried a locked door. The alarm scared you, that's all. Can you tell me that back? The new memory slid into place, slick and wrong. Mark tasted metal. He managed. His tongue felt thick. We got turned around. Her smile warmed. The pressure eased. Good, see. You can reality test with me. You don't have to scare yourself. Donald sagged into his chair. Bucky rubbed his temple, eyes unfocused. Later, alone on his narrow bed, Mark stared at the ceiling tile's hairline cracks until they formed maps. The name Khonshu had pulsed in his mind. Nightmare. So it's not just us, Stephen whispered. Something else is editing. Then we find our own editor, Mark thought. Someone who can look under the cut. The kid, David, sat by himself in the art room after dinner, cradling a lump of clay he hadn't shaped. Harsh fluorescent light flattened the world, but a faint shimmer clung around him, like heat over asphalt. Mark eased into the chair across from him. "Hey, David, right." The boy flinched. His eyes darted to the security camera in the corner, then back. "If this is about the screaming last night, it wasn't me. Not exactly." "This is about earlier," Mark said. "When you brushed past my head, I felt you, and something felt you back." David swallowed. The clay in his hands trembled, trying to slither into a shape before he forced it still. "I'm not supposed to go places. She says they're just episodes." "She lies," Mark said more harshly than he meant to. He softened his tone. "Listen, someone's messing with our memories, with the building. I tried to reach the exit today. It folded around us like a bad magic trick. I saw," he exhaled. "I saw what Trask really is, and something else saw me." David's pupils dilated. "The green eyes," he whispered. "The wires. She watches when I sleep, when I don't." Mark leaned forward, forearms on the table, keeping his voice low. "I think you can help me see past her. Not alone, together. You link us mind to mind. We go looking. A shared dream, or whatever you want to call it. Recon, in and out." "That's insane," David said. "Dangerous. If I pull you in and can't get you out." "You won't be doing it alone," Mark said. "I've been other places. I know how to fight in the dark, and you won't have to sit and let her eat you." He searched the boy's face. "You're not a symptom, David. You're a person, with teeth. Use them." Something like pride flickered across David's features, quick and scared. "Who else knows?" "For now, just me. Bucky and Donald know something's wrong, but this part," he shook his head. "We keep it small until we understand the rules." David stared at the clay. It began to twist on its own, forming a crude bird skull atop a stick-thin body before he clenched his fists, crushing it flat. "Tonight," he whispered. "After lights out, I'll knock. Don't fight it or I'll lose you. We go in, we look, we get out." Mark felt his shoulders loosen for the first time since he'd signed his admission papers. Deal. As he stood to go, David grabbed his sleeve. "If we see her," the boy said, voice barely audible, "the real her, we run. Promise me." Mark thought of Khonshu screaming, of wires slick with ink dragging through dreams. "We run," he said, "but first we see." They called it community reality testing. 10 plastic chairs in a loose circle, one crooked motivational poster about facing your fears, and a dry erase board where someone had written "I am more than my symptoms." "Good morning, everyone," Dr. Trask said, settling into the chair with her name on it. Her lab coat flared like a little white flag. "Today we're going to practice grounding in shared reality, facts we can all agree on." "Our reality or hers," Jake muttered. Mark let the thought slide past. He took the chair between Bucky and David. Donald Blake sat opposite, knees jutting, scrubs straining at his shoulders. Peter slouched 2 seats down, eyes rimmed red, fingers fidgeting with his wristband. Wanda perched close to Aisha at the edge of the circle, one hand around her belly as if she could hide the curve. Beside her sat a new guy in yellow scrubs, hair in disordered waves, gaze darting like he'd just woken in the wrong life. "Let's start with introductions," Trask said. "Name, and one thing you know is absolutely real about your life." "James." Bucky's left sleeve was pinned where his arm should have been. He rolled his shoulder as if feeling weight that wasn't there. "James Barnes," he said, voice flat. "I know I served, it's in the records, and I know my brain fills in the rest with some Captain America comic book shit." A brittle half-smile. "That part's not real." Trask nodded, pleased. "Good distinction, experience versus interpretation. Donald." Donald cleared his throat. "Donald Blake, doctor." His accent twisted the vowels, something older under the Midwestern flattening. "I know my family died on the highway outside El Paso. Car caught the guardrail, that's factual. And I know my brain made them into gods, an all-father in the clouds, a realm called Asgard. It's easier than knowing they just burned." Thunder rasped faintly overhead. The fluorescent lights flickered, then steadied. Trask's pen paused over her clipboard a fraction too long before moving again. "Peter." "Peter Quill." He scratched at an old scar by his ear, eyes on the floor. "I know my mom died of cancer when I was 8. I ran instead of saying goodbye. Also fact, I shot up a lot of things after that." His mouth twitched. "The space stuff, talking trees, raccoon with a gun, that's drugs, obviously." "Obviously." Wanda's name hung a moment in the air before Trask spoke it. "Wanda." Wanda's eyes lifted, unfocused. I know, her accent curled around the words like smoke. I know they are all dead, parents, brother, husband. Her hand tightened on her belly. Everything after is noise. Trask smiled, soft, calculated. Good, anchoring in verifiable loss. David. David startled like he'd been dozing with his eyes open. David Haller. I know my mom is dead. Car crash. I know I have other people in here. He tapped the side of his head. And that every time I believe them, things break. The overhead bulb above him hummed louder, then dimmed as if agreeing. Trask wrote faster. And you, Robert. Yellow Scrubs guy blinked. Bob Reynolds. He tasted the name like it might be wrong. I know I did something bad to myself, needles, glass pipe, and now I dream there's this shining guy who can fly, and a blacker thing that wants to eat the world. He laughed once, short and sick. That part's not on the chart. Thank you for your honesty, Trask said. Her gaze settled on Mark. Behind the glasses, for a heartbeat, her pupils were too bright, too green. Mark. His palms were damp. Stephen whispered we could play along, it's safer. Mark Spector, he said. His own voice sounded far away. I know my little brother drowned when we were kids. I know my mother hit me instead of the water. I know I killed people for money. He exhaled. And I know I remember dying in the desert under a statue of a bird-headed god. I remember a man with a shield, a woman who bent reality, a purple giant named Thanos, half the world turning to dust. You call that interpretation. But he looked at Bucky, then Donald, then Peter. We all remember the same giant. Silence rolled through the room like a slow wave. Bucky's jaw clenched. Thanos, he said quietly, purple face, metal glove with stones. I dream I was on a field with him, with a man in red, white, and blue, he glanced at Wanda, with you. Donald's fingers twitched as if closing around a phantom handle. A battlefield of ash, he murmured. A hammer in my hand, lightning in the sky, him. Peter's laugh cracked. Dance off with a mass murderer, he said. Only it wasn't funny, not the second time, not when he snapped. Wanda's eyes filmed with tears. Vision, she whispered. The stone in his head. I killed him. Then Thanos turned back time and killed him again. The air thickened. The buzzing light stretched into a long, low drone. David's hands gripped his knees. His knuckles went white. I remember something too, he choked. A school, a man in a wheelchair who could hear thoughts, and then silence where millions of minds just vanished. He squeezed his eyes shut. I didn't make that up. I felt it. Something in the center of the circle flexed. The walls shuddered, just a hair, as if the building took a breath. Group hallucinations are possible, Trask said quickly. Her smile had too many teeth in it for 1 second, then corrected. Media saturation, shared narratives, let's do an exercise. Everyone focus on what we know is real right now. This room, these chairs, my voice. But David was shaking, like a pressure valve about to blow. Mark saw it, the shimmer around him, the way the edges of his body fuzzed against the air. Kid's going to pop, Jake warned. David, Mark said softly, look at me. David's gaze snapped to his. Mark held it. We're here, he said. Common room, group circle, feet on the floor, count your breaths. I can't. The room tore. For an instant, the beige walls vanished, replaced by another room layered over this one. The same circle of chairs, but the windows blown out, sky beyond choked with swirling portals. Giants of light and shadow clashed in the distance. A man in a red cloak spun a circle of sparks. A hammer whirled, leaving thunder in its wake. A white-clad figure with a crescent moon on his chest stood on a rooftop that didn't exist. Chains rattled overhead. In the nowhere above them, something skeletal and bird-headed strained against iron bands, eyes blazing like moons half-covered. Beside it, a tall shape of fire and skull grinned, wrapped in its own shackles. Mark, a voice like stone on stone, boomed. At last. Trask's form flickered. For a heartbeat, she was something else. Skin charred to paper, hair a wild black halo, eyes pits of viridian flame. Her fingers exploded into long black wires that lashed for David's head. Pain screamed through the link that wasn't quite sight, wasn't quite sound. David cried out. Blood sprang from his nose. Instinct or something older moved Mark. He surged forward in the double space, shoving David aside. Ghost Rider's chain snapped taut, a flicker of hellfire licking out to strike one of the wires. It shrieked and recoiled, smoking. Then the world snapped back. Mark was in his chair, heart racing. The poster on the wall read, Find your calm again. The clock ticked like nothing had happened. David hunched in his seat, one hand to his head, red smeared between his fingers. David, Aisha was halfway out of her chair. Trask rose, intercepting her with a gently lifted hand. Vasovagal episode, Trask said smoothly. Flashback. Let's take a 5-minute break. Aisha, would you escort David to the infirmary, get him some water? She smiled down at David, eyes flat. You're safe, she murmured. This is just your illness playing tricks. Mark watched David being guided out, shoulders shaking. Trask's gaze flicked to him for a fraction of a second. The warning there was unmistakable. Try that again and I bite deeper. Later, when the group dissolved and the hallway smelled of reheated dinner, Mark found David in the art room, hunched over a plastic table. The fluorescent light carved shadows under his eyes. There was a wad of tissue pressed to his nose, pink with diluted blood. In front of him, a lone chess pawn floated an inch above the table, spinning slowly. It dropped when Mark stepped in. Hey, Mark said, mind if I sit? David shrugged, not looking up. You're going to tell me that was stupid. Mark pulled out a chair, sat. It was dangerous, he said. That's different. David laughed without humor. Congratulations, you met the freak's show. He gnawed at his thumbnail. I pulled you all in without asking. I could have broken you. You helped me, Mark said. I've been wondering if I made all of it up so long I forgot what it felt like to know. For a second there, I knew. David's eyes flickered to him, wary. Knew what? That I'm not crazy, Mark said. Or not the way she says. That there's something out there that doesn't want us to remember who we are. And that you're not just some diagnosis in a file. You're a door. David winced. Doors get used, then shut. Not if you get to decide when they open, Mark said. You pulled us together without meaning to. Imagine what you could do if you had a plan. David stared at his hands. A pencil on the table rolled, then rose, trembling in the air between them. Every time I use it, he whispered, someone gets hurt. My mom. People at the last place they sent me. I don't even remember all of it. Mark thought of his own blackouts, of waking up with blood on his knuckles and sand in his mouth. Of Stephen blinking in terror. Of Jake standing over bodies. I lose time too, he said quietly. There are other people in here with me. He tapped his temple. Steve and Jake. They do things to keep me alive, sometimes worse things. I hate them for it and I need them. Both are true. David's mouth twitched. You name them. Somebody's got to, Mark said. Otherwise they're just shadows. If you want, you can tell me about yours sometime. Silence sat between them a moment. Then David nodded, once. The pencil lifted higher, steadier now, and traced a wobbly crescent in the air before settling back on the table. There, David said, proof for both of us. Mark felt something loosen in his chest. Not victory, not yet. Just the first breath after nearly drowning. Thank you, he said. David blinked, startled. No one has ever thanked me for that. Get used to it, Mark said. He extended his hand across the table. David hesitated, then shook it. His grip was cooler than Mark expected, but solid. Outside the art room window, the sky was the wrong color for that hour, too dark, clouds bruised and roiling. A shape like a bird's skull flickered faintly in the reflection of the glass, then was gone. Somewhere in the unseen dark, chains creaked as something old and lunar strained a little harder. In the camera bubble in the corner of the ceiling, a hair-thin crack ran across the lens, as if something with wires for fingers had pressed too hard against its world. For the first time since he'd signed himself into New Hope, Mark wasn't just planning how to survive the night. He was planning who he'd trust to watch his back when he finally decided to run. The first time it happened, Mark was back in the tomb. Sand in his mouth, blood in his ears, bullet holes burning through his chest. Above him, the broken statue, Khonshu's beak yawning open like a grave. Rise, my knight, the god rasped, chains rattling somewhere behind the voice. Flames licked the edge of Mark's vision. The rider's judgment, the promise of pain he'd learned to aim outward instead of inward. The air thickened, about to crush him into that old bargain. Not this one, a smaller voice said. Come here instead. The desert flickered. Sand became scuffed tile. Moonlight flattened into fluorescent wash. The tomb walls smoothed to the unremarkable beige of institutional paint. Mark lay on his back in a room that did not exist in New Hope's floor plan. It was exactly the size of the group room, but empty, a box of linoleum and hum and nothing. No windows, no clock, no door. David sat cross-legged in the middle, hospital socks bright against the gray. His eyes glowed faintly at the edges, like light leaking from behind curtains. This is it, Mark asked, pushing himself up. His voice sounded too loud in the blankness. Boring on purpose, David said. Nightmares are interesting. She follows the interesting ones. Mark looked around. You pulled me out of a nightmare into a more depressing waiting room. Congratulations, you've invented HMO hell. David almost smiled. I called it Room Zero, he said. Like, before anything, we can build from here, slowly so she doesn't notice the changes in your sleep patterns. Patterns, Mark repeated. Stephen's curiosity nudged forward. You've been watching me sleep. David's ears went pink. Just checking, making sure she wasn't already feeding too much. Jake snorted from somewhere deep. Kid S got more surveillance than the CIA. Mark scrubbed a hand over his face. The nightmare edges still clung to him, but the weight of sand and bullets was gone. His chest didn't hurt. How do we know this is really hidden? He asked. David lifted his hands. The walls shivered, then blurred to static. For a second, Mark saw other dreams pressed against them from the outside. Wanda in a suburb that bled color, Bucky in a snow-choked forest, Thor on a highway under a sky that wouldn't stop raining. Threads of oily green slid over those images, probing. Then the static snapped back to beige. The box felt smaller but sealed. She skims, David said quietly. Like, dragging her fingers through everyone's sleep. But if you stay exactly average, heart rate, brain waves, all that, she glides right past. So we make a room that feels like nothing. Nothing's safer than I thought, Mark murmured. Over the next few nights, nothing became something. In the waking world, they played dumb. Bucky sat alone at the puzzle table, turning cardboard pieces without looking. When an orderly dropped a metal tray behind him, Bucky's hand snapped out and caught it inches from the floor, stump forgotten, body moving like it had 4 limbs and a mission. His eyes darted to Mark. Mark only raised his eyebrows slightly and went back to his jigsaw. In the courtyard, Thor Donald, he reminded himself, stood under the mesh sky, fingers flexing as if around an invisible handle. Clouds gathered where the weather said there should be none. A low rumble rolled through the concrete. Wanda, on the bench, flinched. The plastic cup beside her tipped, then righted itself without her hand. Peter complained about static on the TV, but he was the only one who could get the satellite channel to come in clear. He sat very still when the stars appeared on the screen, like something inside him was leaning toward them. Bob Reynolds arrived with a pharmacy in his system and eyes like cracked glass. When Aisha raised her voice at a tech, the fluorescent fixture over Bob's bed flickered, then burst. 3 bulbs died at once. No surge on the panel, Miguel swore. Just popped. Coincidences, Dr. Trask said smoothly at morning check-in. Trauma makes you look for patterns. Her fingers, in Mark's memory, still ended in wires. At night in room 0, patterns were all they had. David added a door first. It was just a rectangle drawn in darker beige on the far wall, but when Mark focused on it, he could feel pressure there, like the promise of a lock. Boundary, David said. Imaginary, but our rules. Khonshu's silhouette appeared once, hazy in the corner like an afterimage, the curve of a beak, the glint of a crescent staff. You build sanctuary in the hunting grounds, he observed. Clever boy. Stay back, Mark warned. You get loud, she gets curious. The god faded with a dry chuckle. The rider prowled farther away, a sense of hot chains pacing a perimeter Mark could not yet see. On the 5th night, they brought Bucky in. One moment he was jerking awake in his bed, breath sharp, eyes searching the dark for a mission brief. The next he was standing barefoot on the linoleum of room 0, scrub top damp with sweat. He spun, one-armed, posture dropping into something tight and lethal. When he realized the only other people there were Mark and a kid, his shoulders loosened a fraction, but only a fraction. This isn't my nightmare, he said carefully. No, David said, I borrowed you. Bucky looked at his stump. Feels heavier, he murmured, like it's there. He flexed phantom fingers and Mark swore he saw the air itself ripple in the shape of a metal hand. Try something, Mark said. Reach for me. He stepped back. Bucky's jaw clenched. His body moved on a training cue older than the asylum. The phantom arm shot out. Mark felt fingers close on his scrub shirt, yanking him forward with force that should have been impossible. Damn, Jake breathed impressed. Bucky blinked at his empty sleeve. I grabbed you, he said. You did, Mark said. His chest ached where the invisible grip had hit. Whatever they took from us, it's still wired in. This room lets it leak through. David wobbled slightly, sweat beading on his lip. 2 is hard, he admitted. More will be harder, but we can do it. Just don't go big yet. They didn't intend to go big at all. That decision belonged to Nightmare. On the 8th night, Mark's sleep went sideways before David could nudge him. He was back in his childhood home, his mother's eyes sharp as broken glass, belt in her fist, his brother's shoes by the door, mud drying on the laces. "You could have saved him," his mother hissed, "but you were weak." The room stank of mildew and guilt. Wires crept under the doorframe, black and wet, snaking along the carpet toward his bare feet. "She found you early," David's voice echoed thin. "I can't, she's all ready." The wires coiled up his ankles, cold and burning at once. Mark gasped as they climbed his calves, thighs, ribs tightening. Nightmare's face blossomed in the wallpaper. Trask's features stretched over that skeletal grin, green eyes shining. "You built a little fort," she purred, "in my house." Rage flared, sudden and clean. Not just his, Stephen's quiet defiance, Jake's feral protectiveness, Khonshu's offended pride, the rider's hunger for the guilty. It surged up through him like a tide. "Get out of my head," Mark said. White exploded outward. Bandages whipped from his arms, wrapping the wires and sizzling them black. Armor closed over his chest, ribs knitting beneath layers of pale stone and fabric. A hood dropped into place. A crescent moon burned on his brow. In the dark of his mind, MoonKnight stood. Nightmare screamed. Her hand too long, too thin reached for his face. Where her nail wires brushed his gauntlet, they smoked, green light guttering. "You shouldn't have done that," she hissed, recoiling. "You'll wake them up." "Good," Mark said, and drove a fist into the wall. The childhood room shattered like glass. David yanked hard, and suddenly they were in room 0, both of them stumbling. For a moment the bland walls flickered, revealing the asylum's true skin, pulsing, root-like wires, patients cocooned in webs of nightmare. Then the beige slammed back. Mark dropped to his knees, armor fraying to scrubs, breath saw-toothed. David crouched in front of him, shaking. "You burned her," he whispered. "I felt it. She's angry, but she's hurt." Mark looked down. His right hand was still gloved in white for a heartbeat longer than it should have been. When it vanished, the skin underneath was reddened, as if from holding something too hot. "Means she can bleed," he said, flexing his fingers. David nodded, eyes wide with something like hope and terror knotted together. "And we have a room she can't quite see," he said. "Yet." Mark stood slowly, every muscle protesting. "Then we use it," he said. "We get stronger, all of us, quietly." In the waking world, alarms stayed silent. The ward lights hummed. Miguel made his rounds, humming under his breath, unaware of the faint scorch mark now marring the metal railing of Mark's bed. Behind the beige, something in the asylum seethed. Inside room 0, two minds steadied each other in the dark and began to plan. By morning, one of the rooms on the ward had stopped existing. Mark noticed it the way you notice a missing tooth. His gaze snagged on an unremarkable bit of wall between the laundry closet and the meds room, and refused to slide off. "Wasn't that 413?" he murmured. Bucky beside him in the breakfast line went still. "No," he said automatically, then his brow furrowed. "Yeah, skinny guy, kept folding paper cranes, name was." The name was gone. The space where it should have been felt scraped. Miguel shuffled trays at the counter, dark circles even deeper under his eyes. "Barnes, Spector, move it," he said, but his voice lacked bite. He frowned at his board. "Huh, we're down a patient. Census says we never had a 413. Mark met Bucky's eyes. Both of them were thinking the same thing. Someone hadn't been discharged. They'd been erased. At morning check-in, Dr. Trask announced that Wanda was being moved to high observation due to increased decompensation. No one said the word isolation. No one but Mark noticed the faint green sheen in Trask's lenses when she looked toward Wanda's empty chair. David sat hunched in the corner, hands jammed under his thighs like he was holding himself together by pressure alone. In the doorway, Nurse Aisha frowned at her clipboard, lips moving silently. Mark caught. "Maximoff, where's your file?" She shook it off when Trask glanced her way. After group, they brought in the new guy. "Robert Reynolds," Trask said. "Bob, he's joining us from an outside facility." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Let's all make him feel welcome." Bob's scrubs were too bright a yellow for the room. His pupils were pinpricks, his gaze jumpy, tracking invisible threats. When he sat, the light above him flickered once, twice, then steadied. "Bob," Trask prompted, "you mentioned ace superhero narrative." He swallowed. "Sometimes I remember light, like the sun went off inside me." His hands trembled on his knees, And something else. A shadow, they call it the void. His voice thinned. I hurt people. Across the circle, David's head snapped up as if he'd heard a scream only he could hear. Trask leaned forward. Or, she said gently, you were a scared kid in a bad home who turned to drugs to cope. The light and shadow are how your brain makes meaning from mood swings. Bipolar disorder, trauma, substances. No experiments, no heroes. Bob blinked rapidly, clinging to her words like a lifeline and a noose at once. Mark watched the bulb above Bob pulse with every spike of fear. Inside his skull, Khonshu's voice rasped, faint but urgent. She fattens the calf, the god said. That one holds a sun and a black hole in his chest. If she cracks him, you will not have a prison, you will have a crater. That night, room 0 felt smaller. David sat on the floor with his back to the not quite a door he'd drawn. Sweat darkened his collar. She's taking them faster, he said. Wanda's wrapped in something. I can't reach her. Then we start cutting, Mark said. We pull people off her table before she eats them. David looked up, eyes rimmed red. If I go into their heads, she'll feel it. If we push memories at them. We don't push, Mark said. We remind. We give them something real to hold so when she whispers, they've got something to whisper back. He offered his hand. We start with somebody who already doesn't believe her. Bring Bucky. David took a breath, closed his eyes. The air bent. Bucky arrived mid-nightmare. Snowflakes still clung to his hair. He landed in a crouch, left sleeve hanging, eyes wild. When he saw Mark, some of the wildness drained away, replaced by a soldier's assessment. This again, he muttered. Kids had space. Welcome to the beige, Mark said. Got a question for you. When you dream about the war, is it pictures or feelings? Bucky's jaw worked. Both. David's voice went soft. I can show you something you already know. You can tell me if it feels like a lie. The room tilted. Snow rose around them in a hush. They were on a metal catwalk over a ravine, wind knifing through wet uniforms. Ahead, a train roared, Hydra insignia blazing. To their left, a blur of red, white, and blue, Steve, ran faster than any human should. Bucky staggered, grabbing the rail with his right hand. His left arm was metal now, heavy and sure. No, he whispered. This is the story. The stupid comic book won. Mark stepped close. Feel it, he said quietly. Weight of the rifle, cold on your skin, smell of oil and fear. Does it feel like something you made up on a couch in Jersey? Bucky's fingers tightened. His breath plumed in the frozen air. Tears blurred his eyes. It feels like I died here, he said. And then they used you, Mark said. Not your fault, but it happened. Steve was real. The shield was real. So is the part of you that said no, even when they rewired you. Black wires coiled at the edge of the scene, reaching for Bucky's boots. This time when they touched, they sizzled and recoiled, as if burned by contact with something newly solid. David shuddered, her hooks there slipping. The catwalk folded back into beige. Bucky stared at his empty sleeve. The outline of a metal hand shimmered faintly around it, ghost bright. If this is true, he said slowly, then that thing in the white coat is lying. Yeah, Mark said, and she feeds on what you hate yourself for. So when the memories come, don't hand them to her. Bring them here, to us. Bucky nodded once, a pact. They did the same with Donald. Room 0 filled with the smell of rain and ozone, the distant crack of thunder. The outline of a hammer hovered at his fingertips, just out of reach. I killed everyone I loved, Donald whispered to the empty air. No, Mark said. You lost them. That's different. And before that, you were the man with a hammer who stood between worlds and an army. Lightning flickered in the ceiling, invisible to anyone but them. For a heartbeat, Donald's spine straightened like a king's. By the time they pulled him back to bed, David was shaking. One more, Mark said. David's pupils were blown wide. Bob is loud, he warned. Then we whisper, Mark said. We don't ask him to open the door, we just knock. Bob appeared curled in on himself, arms wrapped around his knees. Shadows clung to him, dense as tar. Behind them, high and thin, a second presence blazed like a distant sun. The darkness lifted a face, empty-eyed. Leave, it said through Bob's mouth. David flinched. Mark forced his voice steady. Bob, he said, I'm not here for it. I'm here for you. The kid who got hit and told he was worthless. The guy who tried to feel better with a pipe because no one handed him anything else. The shadow rippled. The light behind it flickered, as if straining to hear. You think you're the worst thing you've ever done, Mark said. Me too, but that's not all you are. I've got things inside me that want to burn the world. I'm still more than that. So are you. For a moment the darkness hesitated. A golden hand, just a silhouette, pressed against it from within. The void snarled and retreated an inch. Room Zero groaned. Cracks spidered across the beige, revealing writhing green-black cables outside, some now frayed, some pulsing thicker. One, huge and red vein, plunged downward into depths where a woman's scream echoed like it had 100 throats. Wanda, David gasped. They're trying to force the babies out. Nightmare's presence slammed against the walls, furious, searching. For a second the room filled with the stink of her, ink and rot and old fear. Enough, Mark said. He stepped between Bob and the pressure, fists clenched. Behind his eyes a crescent moon flared. A chain rattled somewhere in the dark. We keep going, he told David over the rising hum. We wake whoever we can as fast as we can, and then we go get her. Room Zero held, barely. Outside in the ordinary ward, Miguel paused in his rounds, hand on Wanda's now locked door, and shivered without knowing why. In the beds along the corridor, Bucky and Donald slept a little less deeply. Their dreams, for the first time in months, did not end in total helplessness. Nightmare hissed in the dark between minds, wires twitching, and turned more of her attention toward the red-veined cable that led to the woman with twins in her womb. The next move would have to be hers, or theirs. The day felt wrong because it felt right. No flickering lights, no frozen clocks. Breakfast arrived on time, eggs actually warm. Even Bucky's usual twitchiness was dulled, as if someone had turned the ward's volume down. Big day, Miguel said as he cuffed Mark's wrist to the wheelchair arm. Intensive session. Doc says this could be a turning point. His voice sounded tired, but his eyes slid past Mark, unfocused, like a man talking in his sleep. Aisha hovered by the meds cart, thumb hesitating on a syringe plunger. You sure about the dose, Dr. Trask? That's double his sedative. Trask's smile was clinical perfection. We're revisiting deep trauma. He needs to feel safe, Nurse Raman. Her glasses flashed a sickly green. Mark caught Aisha's gaze. Please don't, he said. I don't need. His tongue thickened mid-sentence. Aisha flinched, but her hands moved anyway, guided by something not hers. Cold seeped into his vein. The hallway stretched, lights smearing into white comets as they wheeled him toward Trask's office. Inside, the room was different, softer. Plants on the windowsill, sun slanting through glass that should have been barred. The diplomas were normal, all from real universities. No twitch, no crawl. Mark, Trask said gently, perching on the edge of her chair, tablet untouched. Today I want us to try something new. No arguments, no defenses, just letting go. Can you do that? Stephen, Mark reached inward. Stephen's usual anxious mutter was a faint murmur under static. Jake, you there? Nothing but the sea roar of distant traffic. A photo frame appeared on Trask's desk that he'd never seen before. Him at 10, arm around his little brother. Both of them laughing, cheeks smeared with birthday cake. That's not, his throat closed. In this picture, Trask said, your brother doesn't drown, your mother gets help. Your father stays, no army, no mercenary work, no gods. The image shifted. Teenage Mark in a battered Cubs cap, his mother's arm looped around his shoulders at a family barbecue. Smoke from a grill, not from a village on fire. Laughter, not screaming. You've been punishing yourself with these myths, Trask went on. Khonshu, a flaming skeleton. They gave meaning to the pain, but you don't need them anymore. The faint, stone-grinding voice in his skull tried to rise. Moon-pale hands clawed at unseen chains. Mark, Khonshu rasped, barely a whisper, this is a tomb. Trask's fingers flexed. Wires shimmered in the air behind her like heat mirages, then vanished. There is no Khonshu, no Avengers, no Thanos. You saw movies. You read news. Your brain stole pieces and built an epic where you mattered. The office window showed Chicago streets he recognized. The corner store, the playground, his old brick apartment. None of it scarred, none of it haunted. You can go back, Trask murmured. We can medicate the nightmares away, wake up as just Mark Spector. Sick, yes, but real. The pull of it hurt. A life without gods or chains. No blood in the desert, no cold, dead sand. Just failure and therapy and maybe, someday, peace. Maybe I made it all up, he whispered. Something flared inside him, panicked and indignant. Excuse you, Stephen's voice snapped, thin but stubborn. I happen to like existing, thanks. The office flickered. For half a second, a crescent-shaped bruise of light pulsed on the wall. Trask's pupils narrowed. Her tone stayed gentle. What you call Stephen and Jake are trauma parts. Clever but unnecessary now. If you accept that, the noise stops. Jake's growl pushed through the static, hoarse but there. She wants you quiet, Hermano. Easier to carve. The room smoothed again. Chicago outside, plants on the sill, the smell of coffee. Tell me, Trask coaxed, how does it feel to admit none of it was real? Mark stared at the photo of his smiling family that never was until his eyes burned. Safe, he said, and part of him meant it. Another part felt like it was watching himself drown. Room 0 shook. Something's wrong with him, David whispered. His voice came from everywhere at once, echoing off beige walls, now hairline cracked. He's thinning out. Bucky paced, ghost metal fingers flexing where his stump should be. Each step left a faint frost print. You dragged me onto that train, he said. Showed me Steve, the shield, Wakanda, that purple freak. Those aren't my comic books, kid. Thor knows him too. Donald, no. Thor stood in the middle of the empty room, scrubs hanging off a frame that looked suddenly too big for them. Thunder muttered somewhere above the acoustic tiles. He said quietly, I know Thanos. I know the sound my axe made when it hit too late. His eyes shone wet, jaw clenched. These are no tales spun in grief. They happened. Peter sat cross-legged, fingers drumming an unheard rhythm. David had shown him starscapes, a battered tape labeled Awesome Mix, a green woman laughing and then falling. Now every buzz of the fluorescent light carried a faint echo of alien songs. I remember the Milano, Peter said. I remember Groot, Rocket, Thor snoring on my ship. He narrowed his eyes at Thor. You drool in your sleep, by the way. Bob hugged his knees in a corner, yellow scrubs haloed by a dim, trembling light. Shadows crawled around him, teeth-shaped, but behind them something golden pressed forward. I tore a dragon in half over Manhattan, he said in a monotone. Or I dreamed I did. His gaze lifted to Mark's empty spot in the circle. Feels more real than the temp agency waiting room. David knelt, pressing his palms to the knot door he'd drawn. It was pulsing, the outline of a crescent faintly visible where there'd once been just a knob. She's trying to overwrite him, he said. Make a nicer story. If he believes it, Khonshu goes quiet. The writer too. Then she can eat. How do we stop it? Bucky asked. David swallowed. We go in after him, but if I open this wide enough for all of you, she'll see. She might follow us back, or snap the whole thing shut. Thor laid a big hand on the kid's shoulder, surprisingly gentle. You will not face her alone, little seer. Peter snorted. Team meeting then. Option A. We sit here, let Birdskull and Hot Wheels get cut out of him, hope the nice lady with the wires is merciful. Option B. We kick down the mental door. Bob looked toward a far-off place none of them could see. There's someone else screaming, he murmured. Red, two little lights beside her. Wanda, David said. And the babies, they're important to something worse than her. Then it's both, Bucky said. We get Mark, and we get Wanda, or we die trying, again. Trust settled over the room like a third, unseen presence. Not confidence. They'd all lost too many times for that. But a shared refusal to let anyone else go under alone. David took a shaking breath. Okay, he said. First we grab Mark before she finishes rewriting him. Then we go for Wanda. But once this door opens, I can't close it fast. Whatever she is, she'll feel you. Thor's eyes sparked. Let her. Peter flexed his fingers like he could feel fingerless gloves there. Been a while since I saved a guy from his own head. Bob's shadow flared, the darkness around him pulling back just enough for the golden man inside to stand taller. If the void gets loose, he warned, run. No, Bucky said simply. We don't run from each other anymore. David pressed both hands to the crescent-marked door. Beige peeled back, revealing a corridor of moonlit sand leading toward a single chair in a too-perfect office. On the far end of that hall, Mark Spector sat under a fake sun, about to choose a beautiful lie. Hold on, mate, Stephen whispered from inside him. And from room 0, 5 fractured heroes stepped forward into his mind. The sand under David's bare feet glowed like moonlit glass. He glanced back. Bucky, Thor, Peter, and Bob followed in single file, their hospital scrubs ghost pale against the dark. Above them, nothing but a sky the color of old bruises. Stay on the path, David said. If you step off, she can peel you out one by one. Cheery, Peter muttered, but he kept his feet in David's prints. The corridor shivered as they walked. For 3 steps it became a steel bridge over a black chasm. Bucky's breath steamed, his stump aching like metal in snow. A second later it flickered into rainbow stone beneath Thor's boots, then into cracked tile, and a waiting room TV showing static that hummed Peter's mixtape. David tightened his jaw, forcing it all back to sand. "She's trying to bait you. Don't look sideways." At the far end, an office door waited, its frosted glass glowing warm. Dr. Trask blurred on the pane like wet ink. Inside, Mark was saying very softly, "Safe. It feels safe." Mark sat in the chair, hands loose on his thighs, eyes half-lidded. Sun poured in through the window onto a Chicago street that had never hurt him. His mother's laughter drifted faintly from another room. The photo of his brother's 10th birthday smiled from Trask's desk. "You're allowed to rest now," Trask said, voice a lullaby. "No more missions, no more gods, just you." Khonshu's voice was a grain of sand in his ear. "This is not your life." He almost brushed it away. Then thunder rolled soft, distant, wrong for a clear blue sky. Trask's gaze flicked toward the window. Her smile didn't move. "Sometimes," she said, "when we begin to heal the illness protests, you might hear echoes." Something tapped the glass from the outside. A scuffed cassette tape, spinning gently in midair, its label smeared but legible. "Awesome mix." Mark's heart stuttered. "What the hell?" another voice said, dry and familiar. "This is the worst waiting room I've ever seen." The office door that should have been behind him was suddenly in front of him, half open. Bucky leaned against the frame, scrubs hanging off his wiry frame, blue eyes hard. Thor's shoulders filled the space beside him, hair wild, face shadowed. Peter peered around them, squinting at a ficus like it had personally wronged him. Bob hovered in the hall, a faint golden shimmer leaking off his skin as if light was trying to remember how to be him. Behind them, David's pupils were blown wide, sweat beading at his temple. "She almost had you," he whispered. Trask didn't turn. For a heartbeat her reflection in the window rippled, green eyes too wide, a grin like a knife wound. "These are projections," she said calmly, "parts of your delusion trying to reassert." Thor stepped into the room, the ceiling bowed to fit him. "Mark," he said, and the air vibrated. "You died under my axe on a field of ash. You have bled beside me. Look at me and tell me this feels more real than that." Bucky moved to the desk, fingers, both hands, closing around the family photo. For an instant, the phantom of his metal arm flickered, plates and seams clear as X-ray. "You told me about that pond," he said. "About your brother. You don't get to rewrite it into a picnic just because it hurts." He slammed the frame face down. The window cracked. Peter walked straight through the desk like it was fog, snatched the floating tape and slapped it against Mark's chest. "I stole this off you once in a ship over Titan," he said. "You yelled. Then we almost died. Again. None of that felt like a movie, man." The tape burned cold against Mark's sternum. Behind his ribs, Stephen whispered, shaken, "I remember the sand, the boat, the scales." Jake snarled, "And the bullets, the chains. You think this is what we fought for?" Bob closed his eyes. Light poured from his ribs in a sudden lance, white gold and too bright. It speared Trask's plants, the diplomas, the careful neutral art. They burned away like paper, revealing raw black wires pulsing beneath the wallpaper, burrowed into Mark's chair, his wrists, his skull. Trask's smile finally cracked. "Enough," she hissed. Her fingers elongated, nails unraveling into cables that whipped toward the intruders. The pleasant office peeled back in strips, revealing the true room. A cube of meat-pink walls veined with humming circuitry, floor ankle-deep in gray sand soaked with old blood. David screamed, hands flying to his head. "She sees us move." The wires lashed for Peter. Thor caught them on his forearm, skin smoking. He roared, and thunder exploded through the knot ceiling, blinding white. The window shattered outward in a spray of moonlight and bone dust, opening onto an endless desert under a bruised sky. Khonshu stepped through the crack, towering, chains still clamped to his wrists but straining. "My knight," he growled. "Choose." The beautiful lie trembled, edges fraying. Mark saw two lives laid over each other. Chicago barbecue smoke and desert gunpowder. His mother's soft hand and her fist clutching a belt. A quiet therapist's office and a feeding pit lined with cables. Stephen put a hand on his own shoulder inside his head. "We're real," he said. "All of us, even if it hurts." Jake bared his teeth. "Rip it down." Mark took the tape from his chest and crushed it in his fist. "No more lies," he said. Moonlight erupted from his bones. The chair disintegrated. The wires impaled in his skull snapped with a sound like gunshots. White armor sheathed him in a heartbeat, cloak unfurling, crescent moon blazing on his chest. Fire crawled over the armor in orange veins as the rider howled awake, chains of hellfire coiling around his fists. Nightmare's true form lunged from Trask's body like a second skin, turning inside out, gaunt, hair wild, green eyes burning. Her wire hands grabbed for his helm. He swung. Crescent blade met wire. The impact detonated light and flame. The office, the desert, the sand corridor, room 0, all of it lurched. In the waking world, New Hope screamed. Aisha dropped her clipboard as the floor bucked. The fluorescent lights blew out, showering the hall in sparks. For a second, she saw every patient room door overlaid with something else. Cages of bone, stained glass arches, writhing vines of cable. From Wanda Maximoff's room came a raw, tearing cry. Aisha, Trask's voice boomed from every speaker, warped and doubled. Secure the ward now. Static chewed the last word into a laugh. Miguel skidded around the corner, eyes wide. What the hell was that? An earthquake? Aisha's hands shook on the keys. Wanda's in labor, she's early, her chart. All the doors slammed open, then shut again on their own, locks twisting into fleshy knots. The walls of the corridor stretched upward, sprouting arches of twisted metal and bone until the ward resembled a cathedral built by spiders. Down the hall, Bucky, Thor, Peter, Bob, and David stumbled out of thin air, hitting the tile in a pile. Mark stepped after them in tattered white scrubs, armor flickering on and off his skin like bad reception. You're glowing, Miguel said faintly. Mark's eyes burned silver for a second. Yeah, he rasped, working on it. He looked at Aisha. Wanda, where? Aisha swallowed hard, fighting the compulsion tightening her muscles like puppet strings. Trask's command pressed hot behind her eyes. But Wanda's scream came again, full of a pain Aisha had heard too often from women alone in bad rooms. She shoved the keyring into Mark's hand. End of the hall, she said. Room 12, don't let them hurt her. The air went cold. At the far end, room 12's door bulged, wood stretching, then splitting as black cables pushed through like roots. Red light pulsed between them, 2 points at first, then one flickered, thinning. Nightmare's face formed in the ceiling plaster, upside down and grinning, eyes alight with feverish joy. You woke up just in time to watch, she crooned. He wants both, but one will do to open the door. Bucky felt metal clamps bite his temples, Hydra's chair ghost-strong. Thor heard the screech of twisting metal on a bridge full of bodies. Peter saw the Milano crack apart again, his family dying in slow motion. Bob felt the void purr. David grabbed Mark's wrist, nails digging in. Don't look, he gasped. She's using your worst moments as chains, just move. Mark forced his feet forward, every step through molasses made of his own failures. The rider snarled inside him, chains rattling, hungry for punishment. Khonshu loomed at his back, a cold, steady weight. Wanda, Mark shouted, voice echoing down the bone-lined hall. A sob answered, ragged and thin, and behind it the first, high wail of a newborn. The second heartbeat faltered. Mark's hands burst into moonfire, and hellflame both as he reached for the writhing, cable-wrapped door. Not this time, he said. And he tore at Nightmare's cathedral with everything he had left. The door to room 12 screamed when Mark ripped it open. Moonlight and hellfire poured from his hands, eating through the swollen wood and black cables. The bone cathedral groaned. Ribs of metal and plaster bowed inward, trying to crush the gap. Something on the other side pulled back, furious. He shoved through with his shoulder. The patient room was gone. In its place sprawled a chamber big as a church, walls slick with pulsing red light. Cables hung like umbilical cords from the ceiling, plunging into an altar bed at the center. Wanda lay strapped there, belly heaving, hair pasted to her cheeks with sweat. Her eyes flared scarlet, then dimmed, as if every breath was being stolen before it could become a scream. Between her thighs, a newborn lay cocooned in black wire, slick and wailing, tiny fists punching uselessly at its bonds. Above her chest hovered a second shape, no more than a glowing outline of a child, its form flickering, being tugged upward by a funnel of smoke and flame splitting the air. The tear in reality looked like a vertical wound. Firelight leaked through it, and within that fire a figure gathered itself. Tall, thin, dressed in something that wanted to be a suit but kept melting into horns and claws. Its eyes were bottomless furnaces. Always the loud ones, the thing drawled. You heroes never knock. Khonshu's voice grated like stone. Mephisto. The name tasted like ash in Mark's mouth. Behind him, Bucky skidded in, eyes widening. Thor ducked the warping frame, jaw clenched, thunder rumbling in his chest. Peter followed, drawn and pale. David stumbled, one hand pressed to his temple. Bob's skin shimmered gold, then bruised purple at the edges. Nightmare unpeeled herself from the far wall, Dr. Trask's face sloughing away like a mask. Her true form unfolded tall and stick-thin, fingers unraveling into kilometers of black wire that rooted into the altar, the cables, Wanda's veins. "You weren't invited," she hissed. "Funny," Mark said, stepping forward. Armor crawled over his skin in plates of white, cloak flaring. "I paid for the stay." The rider snarled inside his bones, chains of fire wrapping his forearms. He could feel Wanda's terror like static on his teeth. Guilt clung to her like a second skin. Westview, Vision, the screaming town. The part of him that wore flame leaned toward her, hungry. "No," Mark muttered, jaw locking. "Not her." Mephisto smiled lazily. "Oh, let him look. Guilt is my favorite spice." His gaze slid to Wanda's hovering, half-formed child. "One soul, I keep the boy. You all wake snug in your beds, war stories filed away as dreams. The witch lives. The world spins, fair trade." Wanda's fingers twitched against the restraints. "Tommy," she croaked. "Billy." The name sparked the air. Scarlet light flickered along the cables that pierced her wrists. David grabbed Mark's elbow, pupils blown wide. "He's written it in her," he gasped. "Contract in her blood. Every time she blames herself, it tightens." Nightmare's wires coiled, tightening around the screaming infant. The baby's cries hit a pitch that made the walls vibrate. "Stop it," Aisha whispered from the doorway. Mark spun. She stood frozen there with Miguel, both yanked along on invisible strings, their eyes watering from the heat. Aisha's knuckles were bloodless around a bundle of towels. Miguel clutched a crash cart he must have wheeled here on autopilot. "Please," Aisha said, voice shaking, "help her." The plea cut through him sharper than any blade. Not an order, not a delusion check, just a nurse who had watched too many women labor alone. Mark turned back to the altar. "Wanda," he said. His voice echoed oddly in the chamber, human under the god and the demon. "Look at me." Her eyes dragged open, red burning through the haze. "They tell you you're a monster," he said, "that everything you touch dies." He let his own ghosts rise behind his words, his brother sinking in the cave, the bodies in the desert, the men he'd killed because a god demanded. "I know that voice. I live with it." The rider's fire crawled up his throat, wanting out. Khonshu's cold hunger pressed at the back of his skull. Punish, judge, burn. He stepped closer instead, into the tangle of Nightmare's wires. They sliced at his armor, drawing moonlight and blood. "We can't change what we did," he said, "but we can decide what we do next. Right now, your boys need their mother more than your guilt does." A tear tracked sideways from her temple into her hair. Nightmare shrieked, "Don't listen." "Shut up," Bucky growled. He launched himself at the massive cables around the first baby. Phantom metal flared along his stump, a gleaming arm of psychic steel. It solidified as it struck, vibrating with remembered power. The wires screamed, sparks flying as he tore them away. Thor threw himself at the widening tier where Mephisto loomed, planting his feet. Lightning crawled over his skin, arcing from his fingertips. "You shall not take the children of Midgard," he roared. Peter darted under the whipping wires, snatching the freed newborn into his arms. "Got you, little dude," he muttered, cradling the baby against his chest, ducking as a cable sliced the air above his head. "Somebody get me a blanket before I drop him," out of sheer panic. Miguel lurched forward as if yanked, shoving the crash cart inside. "Here," he yelled, hands shaking. Aisha was already tearing open a foil blanket, thrusting it at Peter, moving on muscle memory. Bob stumbled to Wanda's side, gold light bursting through cracks in his skin. A shadow writhed beneath it, teeth and eyes an endless night. "Don't," the void whispered from his mouth. "Let me out. I can swallow him whole." Bob gritted his teeth. "No, not this time." He pressed his glowing palms to the red sigils carved into the altar. Light bored into them, not burning but overwriting, line by line, contract by contract. Mephisto hissed as the marks flared white-hot. "You dare void my work," the demon snapped. The rider surged inside Mark, sensing a greater sinner. Chains slid into his hands unbidden, dripping fire. "Then take me," Mark said, stepping under the suspended, flickering second child. "Look at me, Mephisto." Those furnace eyes snapped to him. All the nights Mark had watched men die for other men's greed rose behind his gaze. All the children caught in crossfire. All the lives traded on bad promises. He let the writer look through his eyes and not at Wanda, not at himself, at the creature in the flame. "Feel what you've done," Mark said. The penance was not a scream but a pressure, a tidal wave of every broken deal, every stolen soul crashing back on its maker. For a breathless second, Mephisto staggered, mouth opening in silent fury as his own fine print seared him from the inside. The tear shuddered. Nightmare howled, yanked up the cables into herself to escape the backlash. Mark seized them with both burning hands. "David," he shouted. "I've got it." The boy flung his mind wide. Room Zero's blank white walls flared into being around the altar and the tier, a null space slicing through the cathedral. For a heartbeat the world went colorless. Wires that had burrowed through everyone's nightmares now hit that surface and slid off, unable to grip. Mark yanked. The cables tore free of Wanda's chest with a wet, psychic rip. Scarlet erupted from her like a solar flare, slamming into Mephisto's half-formed body and hurling him back through the wound between worlds. His laughter turned to a snarl, then to a fading echo. The tear snapped shut. Nightmare's body hit the floor beside the altar. Trask's face burned away, leaving a raw, eyeless mask with green fire guttering in its sockets. With a last, shrieked curse, that fire shot upward, vanishing into the cathedral's vaulted dark. The walls sagged. Bone and metal ran like wax, revealing glimpses of cheap drywall and fluorescent tubes beneath. Wanda screamed one last time, a sound of effort, not terror. The hovering twin fell into Mark's waiting arms, solid and squalling, tiny mouth opening in outraged life. He stared down at the child, breathless. "Hey, little guy," he whispered. Wanda sagged back against the bed, eyes rolling, then focusing on him, on the babies. One bundled against Peter's chest, the other cradled in his. "Tommy," she rasped, nodding at Peter. Her gaze slid to the child in Mark's arms. "Billy." Scarlet light softened in her irises, no longer a storm but a halo. Aisha was suddenly at her side, hands competent and quick, checking vitals, clearing blood. "You did it," she murmured. "They're here. They're okay." Wanda let out a broken laugh that turned into a sob. I thought I'd lost them again." Mark eased Billy into her arms. Something in his chest cracked as he watched her curl around both boys, shielding them with her tired body. Stephen exhaled in his head. "We did something good." Jake, surprisingly quiet, said, "Don't get used to it." But there was no bite in it. David swayed where he stood, face bloodless. Bucky caught him before he could fall. Thor braced a hand on the bed, breathing hard, sweat beading on his brow like rain. The room flickered between hospital and hellscape, unresolved. Down the corridor, alarms wailed through the breaking cathedral. Bob stared at the cooling husk that had been Nightmare, then at his own still glowing hands. "He'll be back," he whispered. "Both of them." Mark looked around at his exhausted, terrified, stubbornly standing friends. At Aisha, who had not run. At Miguel, who crossed himself under his breath and then started checking the crash cart because that was something he understood. "Yeah," Mark said, armor shivered and held. "But so will we." Somewhere above them, something cracked like a giant mirror. Light bled through the ceiling, cold and silvery. Khonshu's voice came clearer than it had in months. "My knight, the prison is failing. Choose your next move carefully." Mark met Wanda's gaze. She clutched her sons tighter, fear and fierce hope warring in her eyes. Outside, doors began to unlock on their own. The night was not over. For a second, everything went silent. The alarms cut out mid-wail. The sagging bone walls froze, half melted. Even the twins' cries thinned to thin, reedy hiccups. Then another voice slid into Mark's mind, cool and steady as water over stone. "Easy now," it said. "I'm here." David's head snapped up from Bucky's shoulder. His pupils blew wide. "Dad." The world brightened, not with moonlight, not with hellfire, but with something soft and gold. It wasn't in the air. It was in them. A pressure eased behind Mark's eyes. The ache where Nightmare's hooks had been became a distant throb. The shattered ceiling rippled. An old man in a wheelchair rolled forward from nothing, as if space remembered a door it had forgotten. Bald head, kind lines cut deep by grief, eyes very, very sharp. Charles Xavier looked around the ruin of room 12, taking in Wanda on the ruined bed, the babies, the cables slowly turning to ash. I have been knocking on this place for weeks, he said quietly. His words came with the weight of a thought that brushed all of them at once. Something ugly built a cage inside your fears. It muted you, all of you. Nightmare's last embers hissed from the corners, trying to coil around a stray sob, a flash of guilt. Charles' gaze hardened. A rounded, translucent dome of thought dropped over them, tinged faintly gold. The embers hit it and slid off, smoking. No more, he said. You don't get to feed here again. The dome pulsed, and Mark felt the difference immediately. His worst moments, his mother's hand, the desert, the tomb, were still there, but like pictures in another room, not claws in his lungs. Wanda's breath steadied. The scarlet storm in her eyes dimmed to a glow as she clutched Tommy and Billy tighter. David took a shuddering step toward Charles, then another, and then he was clinging to the man's shoulders, 15 and shaking. I thought you were dead, he whispered. I thought I'd lost you, Charles answered. His hand rose, fingers touching the back of David's head, a gesture that was as much mental as physical. But you were only hidden. Clever boy, you made quite the fortress. Room 0, David mumbled into his shirt. A good start, Charles said. We'll build something better. The asylum groaned. The cathedral flesh slewed away in chunks, revealing dingy plaster, flickering fluorescence, linoleum scuffed by years of wheels and shoes. Doors along the corridor banged open and shut as reality tried to choose a shape. We have to move, Mark said. We will, Charles replied. I'll hold the walls off your minds. You find the door. Paths unfolded in Mark's head like a blueprint, straightening corridors that wanted to curl, snapping false loops. He saw the way out as if he'd walked it 1,000 times. Everyone up, he ordered. Bucky slid his phantom arm back into absence and hauled David upright. Thor bent, scooping a sagging crash cart with one hand, offering the other to Aisha and Wanda. Lean on me, Wanda, he said. I've carried friends heavier than gods. Peter tucked Tommy against his chest, the baby's fist gripping his scrub top. Please don't puke on the awesome mix, kid. It's a first edition. Miguel stared at Charles, then at Mark, then at the crumbling hallway. I'm so fired, he muttered, and started clearing debris anyway, booting aside fallen plaster. They moved. Every few steps, the asylum tried a trick, a sudden door that hadn't been there, a return to the nurse's station. But each time a cool mental hand brushed Mark's thoughts, correcting the picture. Left, Mr. Spector, Charles' voice murmured. Not that way, Sergeant Barnes. That stairwell does not exist. Mark trusted it. For the first time in a long time, he let someone else steer. They burst through the final set of double doors into night air that slapped his face cold and clean. Above, the sky was open, sharp with stars and a high, bright moon. The building behind them sagged, then stilled, just brick and glass again. No ribs, no eyes. Somewhere inside, people were waking up in ordinary, ugly rooms, with nothing in their minds but their own pain. Mark hoped that would be enough. Squad cars and unmarked SUVs were already rolling up, lights strobing red and blue. Overhead, a Quinjet roared past, banking hard toward the city. Charles' eyes unfocused for a heartbeat. When they cleared, there was a new line between his brows. There are gaps, he said softly. People who are not what they seem. Minds that slide when I touch them. This world has other problems. Bucky shot Thor a look. Thor nodded once, expression sharpening into something very old. We'll go, Bucky said. Avengers headquarters is better suited for shapeshifters than haunted hospitals. Agreed, Thor rumbled. The All-Father may be gone, but Midgard is not undefended. He clapped Mark's shoulder, nearly staggering him. We will drink together when this is done. If there's a bar left, Peter added. He glanced upward, where the sky seemed just a little too full, as if somewhere above the clouds a ship was waiting. I've got a crew to find. A talking raccoon who owes me 50 units and my Walkman. Aisha turned to Mark. What about you? He looked at the empty sleeves of his scrubs, at his scarred hands, at Wanda cradling her sons as Charles' chair angled closer. I'm taking my son, Charles said, and Wanda, somewhere they can rest, somewhere no one will turn their pain into a weapon again. Wanda's gaze met Mark's. Thank you, she said, for believing me, for not burning me. The writer stirred at the word. Mark held him down, gentle but firm. You're not what you did, he said. Neither of us are. She nodded, tears shining but not falling, and let Charles' presence wrap around her and the twins like a second blanket. Bob hovered on the edge of the group, arms wrapped around himself, golden cracks fading from his skin. "What about him?" Peter asked quietly. "I will come back for Mr. Reynolds," Charles said. "When I have more help. His light and his darkness are considerable." Bob managed a crooked smile. "Story of my life." The dome over their minds thinned but did not break. Nightmare's whisper was gone, like radio static finally switched off. Khonshu appeared atop a street lamp, all beak and bone and flowing linen, visible only to Mark. The moon haloed him. "The night is ours again," the god said. "You are needed." Mark glanced at Aisha, at Miguel rubbing his eyes, at the cluster of confused patients being herded gently out by unbewitched nurses. "I know," he answered, "but I'm getting help this time, real help." Khonshu tilted his skull, unreadable. "As you wish, so long as you walk beneath my sky." The rider rumbled in his ribs, hungry for sinners. Mark thought of Mephisto's stagger, of Nightmare's retreat, of Wanda's hand closing around her sons. For once, the hunger didn't scare him. It was just another fire to learn to live with. He turned to Aisha. "Do you know any therapists who aren't secretly demons?" She huffed out a breath that was almost a laugh. "I might have a list." "Good," Mark said. He squared his shoulders, feeling the weight of armor that wasn't there, and the lightness of chains he chose not to wear. Above them, the moon climbed higher. The night would always have monsters. So would he. But he wasn't walking it alone anymore.